Continue with a look on U.S. elections. Joe Biden has overtaken President Donald Trump in the count in Pennsylvania as the state's Democratic-leaning counties report additional vote count totals. The count continues, but the state's 20 electoral votes would put Biden over the 270 votes needed, even with a handful of other states still too close to call. Meanwhile, political analyst and author Eusebius McKaiser says mature democracies don't treat political opponents like wartime enemies. He joins us now to talk about how South Africa can teach the U.S. about repairing a divided society. Eusebius, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I want to start with what we're seeing now. So some are saying, the electoral vote is basically in, and they're saying the popular vote is pretty much clear. But what are your thoughts on this? We're talking about Wisconsin, we're talking about Georgia, and the fact that Biden is pretty much in the lead. Would you call it at this point?
Look, America is, to be so, as we know, a very litigious society. And that means that from a process point of view, President Donald Trump is likely to maximize whatever it is that the law allows him in terms of challenging recounting, where it has been so close that recounting may be legitimate. And I think it will be a couple of days or so before we settle down to having a clear outcome. It does look, as per your conversation with Sherwin Bryce-Pease, as if Joe Biden has got it stitched up. And if I was a betting man, I would say that the next president will be Joe Biden. But the big issue for America is not so much whether Biden will win. I think he probably will. The question is, as per the article that you referenced, how should America go about reckoning with political differences between its citizens?
Let me ask you that question then. You're saying that it shouldn't be an existential battle where losers get obliterated. But I'm wondering, what were the forefathers of America thinking when they envisaged the we, the people, in the anthem? Who is the we?
That's a beautiful question, because America is a federal state that is not a unitary one, even though there's a federal government. And what that tells you about the vision of the founding parents is that they had in mind a society that is deeply diverse, so diverse that you wanted to make sure that each of the different states had their own character, certain amount of decentralized and devolved government away from federal states that are unitary, where a central decision is made that affects the entire length and breadth of society. So obviously some people would not envisage, for example, Black people, Latinos, minorities. They were not part of those that were meant to be enfranchised in a modern, complex 21st century democracy. But even if you only had white voters in mind, I think the founding fathers were aware that America, the USA, is a heterogeneous society rather than a homogeneous society. But what we've seen, Sapiso, over the last couple of days is an American society and citizenry that really struggles with the question of what should we do with having deep ideological differences between us. You literally have 50% of American voters saying we are in support of someone with one vision, and almost 50% saying we support someone with a diametrically opposed vision. And what Foreign Policy magazine asked me to do in the article you referenced was to ask, how does a society like South Africa deal with deep historical differences? And are there lessons that we can gift America for how to negotiate really, really fractious differences between citizens?
So we'll talk about the procedural aspect in just a moment. So let me then just hop on to that. Our historical differences. What role can the culture shapers there play in the U.S. in ensuring that there is a system that is not only politically engaging, but is not too contested without maturity?
Yeah, and it has to do with political culture. Democracy has got procedural aspects to it, regular, free and fair elections, and then there is political culture, which is a little bit more ethereal, and it's difficult to get a clear handle on it from an analytical point of view. But it's not that difficult if we spend just a moment reflecting on it. Political culture has to do with norms such as, how do I view someone that I deeply disagree with? If I'm a member of the EFF, what should be my posture towards a friend of mine that is a member of the DA? If I am a committed member or supporter of the ANC, how do I view someone that I think I like until they told me that they are a card-carrying member of Freedom Front Plus? And in a mature democracy, if you lose the argument, then you accept that you've lost it. And losing an election just means that you've lost the argument. And what America has to deal with at the moment, SABC, is to accept that even though it is one of the oldest democracies on planet Earth, it doesn't seem to have a political culture that is particularly mature, even though it has had many democratic elections. And I think one of the really difficult conversations American opinion shapers, American media, analysts, thinkers, and ordinary American citizens must immediately grapple with is, how does one learn to live with the prospect of sometimes losing elections and with the fact that deep ideological differences come naturally with a diverse and complex society.
So let's talk about the systemic challenges. Electoral Integrity Project, which is a Harvard-based project and other, I think, Australian universities, found that the American elections are the worst among all Western democracies. I mean, that's quite something to hear for what we've been told as the most progressive democracy in the world. So how do we compare despite the threats to our political systems?
Yeah, you and I, as political animals, can spend lots of time on this, but let me give you the short answer for today. Firstly, I hesitated in my comparative analysis between South Africa and the USA because obviously we shouldn't be glib about how beautiful our system is. The IEC in South Africa is often under pressure. We have deep disagreements between ourselves that we need to talk about. And many of the democratic institutions in South Africa are under enormous pressure all the time. But I don't think South Africa is about to implode as a democratic system electorally and also in terms of our body politic. And what America can learn from us is the importance of safeguarding democratic institutions and making sure that the equivalent of an IEC at a state level gets respected in terms of their actual objectivity and independence and how they are perceived by citizens in terms of doing non-partisan work when it comes to running the elections. And to give America its due, Tsepiso, I mean, you're talking here about millions and millions and millions of people in a complex operation. Just from an operational point of view, it is an incredibly impressive process that is underway, despite the fact that Donald Trump is the worst exemplar of being an anti-democratic president in the history of America. So on the one hand, Americans shouldn't beat themselves up because they're going through this seemingly existential crisis and this battle for the soul of America. On the other hand, they should stop being arrogant and believe this false belief that they are the greatest nation on earth, when quite clearly what is playing out in America is the kind of thing that Americans usually think plays out in Africa or in far-flung corners of the universe. And I think Americans must reckon with the reality that they themselves are sometimes not as deeply committed to democratic culture as they would like to believe.
And I want to talk about the quality of their democracy. I mean, just looking at the here and the now, different states with different rules. If we're talking about the court challenges that Donald Trump is threatening to mount, some have criticized the American elections for its lack of professional and impartial electoral management. What are your thoughts on this?
I hesitate to give a definitive view because I think one needs to be guided by the facts, and on a case-by-case basis where allegations are made, then even as journalists, we need to ask ourselves what evidence is adduced by he who alleges that there is mismanagement. And in the early hours of the morning, you, like me, would have seen Donald Trump, for example, alleging mass voter fraud without deducing any evidence. And you've got to ask yourself, if so many American elections have taken place with peaceful transition from one administration to another and an acceptance of the legitimacy of the work of each of these state-level bodies that run the elections, why suddenly in 2020 are we asking with a massive question mark questions about the integrity of the electoral process? So I think what's going on here is politics more than anything else. And the refrain of the day, of the week, Tsepiso, is let every single valid vote be counted. So we've got to be very careful about how political agendas are being weaponized, and they're being weaponized in relation to outcomes that someone like Donald Trump wants. And he uses that political agenda by casting aspersions on the men and women who are doing an honest day's work when it comes to the administration of these electoral processes.
In fact,
and unless there's evidence, I don't think that we can accept that critique.
And as a final question, Eusebius, I want to talk about it, how Donald Trump uses. So digitization, technological tools have been very much at the center of this. So you can either use it for progress or for chaos. And you mentioned that as South Africans, for instance, we can't exactly just go to YouTube and watch videos of Nelson Mandela to achieve nation building. So how can the Americans learn from this lesson? Donald Trump, he's a 10-year administration, and how he's used technology to drive, as I said, either progress or chaos.
A couple of quick lessons. Firstly, it is not good enough to bemoan what doesn't work in your society. You must try and bring about change in your society. So simply describing Donald Trump is not good enough. Bemoaning Donald Trump is not good enough. You've got to be the change that you want to be. The Republican Party, Tsepiso, has missed an opportunity. They should immediately, over the last 24 hours, have distanced themselves from this man, even if they've been supporting him since 2016. So if I were to advise an American watching our conversation right now, I would say, forget about the past. There's nothing you can do about it. But starting right now, learn how to live, with deep differences between yourself and other people in your society. And secondly, going forward, make sure that you invest deeply in habituating new ways of being a good Democrat.
All right. Thank you so much for your time and insights. Really appreciate it. Eusebius McKaiser, analyst and author.